Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christine Rodriguez and I have a podcast called AstrologyNow Podcast where I post weekly. So if you enjoy learning about Vedic sidereal astrology, I recommend checking out my podcast, Astrology Now. It's available on all major platforms. And so today I'm posting a video that is based off of a podcast I made recently. And I know that Vedic astrology is one of these things that can be super complicated. Sometimes if we're just listening to it, we have no idea what's going on. So I thought making a video that has visuals could be really helpful. And so again, this is a segment that is based off of a podcast I've already published. And we're diving into the topic of women's issues, women's rights, when women have gone missing, when women have been persecuted, the successes of women overcoming the odds. And I found a few signs that are highly relevant when it comes to women and women's rights. And of course, I'm looking at nakshatras as well. I found a few nakshatras that seem to always be involved when women's issues are being discussed. And so we will dive into the nakshatras as this video goes on, but I do just want to say right off the bat, some of the signs involved are going to be the signs of Cancer. Of course, the sign of Cancer is involved when we're talking about women and issues about women. Cancer is the mother, it is the nurturer. Within the sign of Cancer, there's the nakshatra of Pushya, which is literally symbolized by the udder of a cow, breasts to nourish and take care of the people around it for that nakshatra Pushya. So I did see that there is a high correlation with Pushya, but the sign of Cancer in general, which again makes complete sense. But I don't want to give the entire segment away. Let's go ahead and jump in and we'll continue looking at the signs that seem to be most relevant when it comes to women and women-related issues. I also want to note that nothing can ever be totally deemed as good or bad when we're looking at astrology. We always want to see everything as a whole. So I want to remind you of that because some of these nakshatras seem to be more prevalent when beneficial things are happening, but we can see them when negative things are happening too, and vice versa. So we always want to see everything happening in the night sky to deem something positive or negative. But again, these signs, these nakshatras, I've seen repeatedly when it comes to women and women's related issues. So let's dive in. Okay, so here are all of the charts that I have pulled up, and please keep in mind, these are only a few of the examples that I have. Do your own research, look at your own charts, and I'm sure that you will see similar consistencies. It's absolutely amazing. And also, we're going to see how this information is relative to where we are right now historically. So fascinating. So getting into this, when we look at the first female president, the first woman who was ever nominated as a president of the country, she was the president of Iceland. She was nominated June 29th, 1980. And when this happened, we can see that Ketu is in the sign of Capricorn and Rahu is in the sign of Cancer. We are going to be seeing this so much. When Rahu is in the sign of Cancer, this is a trigger point for issues surrounding women to come to the surface. It's absolutely amazing. As we were talking about, Cancer is the mother, it's the nurturer, it's a highly, highly feminine sign. It's all about taking care of others and is associated to femininity. And again, Rahu here is in Ashlesha, but we will see Pushya become very prevalent. But again, I'm not surprised at all that Rahu is just in the sign of Cancer in general. When the National Women Suffrage Association, this is such a mouthful. I've tried to record this like 8 times. I'm not redoing it. When the National Woman Suffrage Association was founded on May 20th, 1869, we can see that Rahu again was in the sign of Cancer in the nakshatra of Ashlesha. Ketu, of course, is in the sign of Capricorn. Something else that I want to note is that the nakshatra of Jyeshta in Scorpio is going to become highly relevant again for reasons that I'm not super surprised about. As we continue this, I will begin to show you more charts that have Rohini, Jyeshta the signs of Taurus and Scorpio highly prevalent. But as we can see here, in 1869, Rahu was in the sign of Cancer when this association was founded. When the first woman was nominated for the Supreme Court, this was on September 25th, 1981. And as you can see, Rahu was in the sign of Cancer in the nakshatra of Pushya. When Sojourner Truth gave her speech, Ain't I a Woman, on May 29th, 1851, this was massive for women, and women from all walks of life, women of all shapes and sizes, women of all colors. This was such a massive speech. You will not take any class on women's history and not talk about this speech, more than likely. Again, it took place on May 29th, 1851. As you can see, Rahu was in Cancer in the nakshatra of Pushya. And let's see, yeah, we have some Taurus going on too. Again, that's going to become super prevalent. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won the 14th congressional district in New York, this was a complete surprise. I don't think that many people expected it to happen. When she won, it kicked so many questions to the forefront. I mean, I feel that once AOC won, the squad formed, which was this powerful group of women, including Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley. You know, these amazing women from all walks of life, of all shapes and sizes and colors, came together and started demanding that they wanted a change. Also, this was followed by the Me Too movement, it was around the same time as the Me Too movement, which I'll talk about in a second. But these women's issues really did come up. It was absolutely amazing, and she really did. Her win and her presence in Congress totally changed everything. Rahu was in Cancer, of course, in the nakshatra of Pushya. When Me Too gained popularity, it was between like the end of 2016 into 2018. But I looked up when it became the most popular, and apparently Me Too was tweeted out, and it was tweeted out almost 1 million times in 2 days. This was between October 15th and October 16th, 2017. As you can see, Rahu was in Ashlesha, in the sign of Cancer, and it would have, of course, moved through Pushya as it continued to gain a lot of popularity into 2018. But Rahu in Cancer, again, this is a highly feminine sign. It's bringing these feminine issues up to the forefront. And notice it's always Rahu. Rahu is in Cancer in all of these. When Bill Cosby was sentenced to prison on September 25th, 2008, we see that Rahu is in Pushya. Ketu is in Travana, but we can see that Rahu again is in the sign of Cancer. When someone was brought to justice, of course, this was around the same time that all of the Jeffrey Epstein stuff was coming to light, and a lot more people were kind of being outed and discovered at that time as well. Okay, so this is when we shift gears a little bit into a new nakshatra. So we already saw the power of the sign of Cancer, of the nakshatra of Pushya especially, and now we're looking at the sign of Aries, specifically the nakshatra of Bharani. This is absolutely amazing. Again, do your own research. It's crazy, crazy. Bharani, the nakshatra, it's represented by a female yoni. It represents major breakthroughs, giving birth, having this painful experience that results in something great. Okay, you know, there is a darkness to Bharani as well, but overall it represents major breakthroughs, and it's symbolized by a female sexual organ, by female genitals, by a yoni. That's what a yoni is. So when Ketu is in Bharani, this is when women won the right to vote August 18th, 1920. It's absolutely amazing. We can also see 2 planets in the nakshatra of Swati. Swati is another really feminine nakshatra. It's associated to Saraswati, the goddess of learning, the goddess of music. There is a lot of femininity when it comes to the nakshatra of Swati, so I was not surprised to see that women got the right to vote when Ketu was in Bharani, Rahu was in Swati. So now we're looking at the chart of when the Ariel Castro captive escaped. So if you're unfamiliar with this story, Ariel Castro is somebody who kidnapped multiple women and kept them in his home. It was absolutely horrific. They were in his home for years. And these women finally escaped to their freedom from this horrible prison on May 6th, 2013. And so on this day, when these women escaped, we see Ketu again in the nakshatra of Barney. And not only Ketu was in Barney, right? There's a stellium of planets in the nakshatra of Barney. A stellium is when 3 or more planets are in the same sign. So it's not only even in the sign of Aries, they're all in the sign of Barney. Major breakthroughs, women empowerment. Again, it's this major breakthrough represented by a female yoni. Absolutely amazing. I thought it was so cool to see that. Of course, Saturn is also in Swati at this time, but the major focus that I'm looking at is the Ketu in Barney and then the rest of these planets in Barney. And so now we've looked at charts of really powerful women, of really amazing events for women, when women have made history, had major breakthroughs, when justice was brought for women. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit into a darker portion of the sky. Okay, Again, I don't want to label anything as good and bad, and I have seen a few consistencies with some other signs that seem to be a little bit more difficult. So we'll go ahead and jump into that. So this is the date that the Black Dahlia event occurred. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Black Dahlia, this was a really beautiful young woman. She was 22 years old and she was murdered, brutally murdered and mutilated and left on the side of the road. No one ever figured out who did this to her. No one ever figured out her murderer. And again, her death occurred on January 16th, 1947. On this day, Ketu was in the nakshatra of Jyeshta and Rahu was in the nakshatra of Rohini. The signs of Scorpio and Taurus we will see repeatedly throughout time for women and women's related issues, particularly the nakshatras of Jyeshta and Rohini. Again, I'm not surprised to see this. The story, the mythology of Jyeshta and Rohini is that we know we have the 12 signs of the zodiac, and within those 12 signs, we have the 27 lunar mansions. And Chandra, or the moon, passes through all 27 nakshatras every month. Every month, it's said that Chandra, or the moon, particularly liked staying in the lunar mansion of Rohini. She was the most beautiful of the sisters. She was the most luxurious, the most voluptuous. She was the most lusted after. This is the portion of the sky that the moon is exalted. Okay, this is where the moon feels its best. It loves being in the nakshatra of Rohini. After some time, the other sisters noticed what was going on with Chandra and Rohini, and they got really upset and really jealous. The eldest sister, Jyeshta, she's the eldest, she's the most responsible, she has the most authority. She also tends to be the most jealous. She saw what was going on, and she's the one who took control of the situation and told her father what was happening. She told on Chandra, she told on Rohini because of her jealousy and because of her anger. So there is this connection to Jyeshta and Rohini where issues between women get brought to the surface. It could be issues of jealousy, injustice, being unfair. Regardless, matters of women get brought up to the surface for them to be acknowledged. Of course, not every time this happens, something as horrific as the Black Dahlia event is going to occur, but we see these issues around women being brought up. You know, it made people question the safety of women, the integrity of women. This idea that if a woman is beautiful or if she does something a little bit more risque with her occupation, that people have the right to hurt her. You know, this got brought to the surface like, no, it's not okay. It's never okay. Issues of women got brought up. I thought it was also interesting that Saturn was in the nakshatra of Pushya, just adding pressure to that area of the sky. So the Ted Bundy murders, if you're not familiar with Ted Bundy, he's a super famous person. Unfortunately, he murdered many, many women in really horrific ways. When the majority of women started going missing were between, I believe it was like 1973 and 1976. It was something in that area. And of course, in that portion of time, Rahu would have been in Scorpio and Ketu would have been in Taurus. I just pulled this chart up for you guys to see because it was a few years of time. And during this period, when Rahu was in Scorpio and Ketu was in Taurus, a lot of the murders were taking place and people were like really questioning the safety of women in their own homes, you know, how to keep them safe, things of that nature. Again, as we can see, Rahu's in Jyeshta. Ketu is in Taurus and would have passed through, of course, all the nakshatras in Taurus. So I thought that this was super interesting. When Ted Bundy was charged with murder, he did escape from prison, okay? He ends up escaping. It ends up becoming some massive saga. But when he was initially found guilty and initially charged with murder, having justice brought to him, it was on February 17th, 1976. And on this day, Ketu was in the nakshatra of Barney. Rahu was in the sign of Libra, of course, in the nakshatra of Vishaka. But it's that Barney nakshatra that I want to show. Massive breakthroughs for women, justice for women. We've seen this a few times. It's really, really powerful. And again, this was when he was charged with murder and they figured out who that person was. You know, it eased the mystery. It helped people know what was going on. That mysterious element of Scorpio was like brought to light. When Rosa Parks refused to get up off of her seat, okay, it was December 1st, 1955. Rosa Parks refused to get off of her seat from the bus, and it did bring issues to light around women, how we treat women, and of course contributed massively to the civil rights movement. When this occurred, Rahu was in Jyeshta, Ketu was in Mrigashira. Super, super interesting. We're going to see this a few times. I want to talk more about Mrigashira. And so Elizabeth Smart. If you guys are not familiar with the Elizabeth Smart story, this was yet another young, beautiful woman who was kidnapped, like beneath the nose of everybody. She was kidnapped for a few months and luckily they found her. But I want to show you, I want to show you what I'm seeing in this. So when Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped, it was June 5th, 2002. Ketu again is in the nakshatra of Jyeshta. Rahu is in the nakshatra of Mrigashira. Sun was also in Rohini, which is interesting, right? These nakshatras that have to do with women. The nakshatra of Mrigashira, the mythology is actually about a woman being stalked and a woman being chased. It's a really interesting story. And there is a connection to incest. There's a connection to searching. There's a connection to, again, being chased, trying to capture something. Rahu was in Mrigashira, Sun was in Rohini, Ketu was in Jyeshta. All of these nakshatras are so heavily involved with women and women's related issues. Again, we're seeing this over and over and over again. Luckily, when Elizabeth Smart was found on March 12th, 2003, Ketu was still in the sign of Scorpio. Rahu was still in the sign of Taurus. What I think is super interesting is that between these two charts, Jupiter moves out of Gemini and into the nakshatra of Pushya in the sign of Cancer when she's found. I thought that was so cool. Of course, the moon was in Purnarvasi that day as well. But I like this example because it shows that she was taken, she was kidnapped, but then she was found. She was found in the same cycle. And so I wanted to use that as an example because I don't want you guys to think that only horrible things are going to happen in these time spans, right? We have to look at everything holistically, but we can definitely find these patterns, which I think are really difficult to ignore. Another thing, final thing I'll say about this is that the Salem witch trials, okay? This occurred May 15th, 1962. It occurred between like February 1962 into 1963. It lasted about a year, which is interesting because that's the same amount of time. Just about. Rahu and Ketu stay in the sign for about 18 months, but it like completed that cycle. During the Salem witch trials, the entirety of it, Ketu was in Cancer and Rahu was in Capricorn. If we go back and look at all of the other events that we looked at with really positive events, with major breakthroughs, with women making history, it was reversed. Rahu was in Cancer, Ketu was in Capricorn. And now during the Salem witch trials, where mostly women were persecuted, the majority of people persecuted as witches were women, we see Ketu in the sign of Cancer, Rahu in Capricorn. So I thought that that was really, really interesting. And so I'm going to pull the charts down now and we're going to talk about how this can be relative to life now. So how is this relevant to right now? If we were to look in the night sky, we would see that Rahu is in the sign of Taurus and Ketu is in the sign of Scorpio. So these pressure points are being hit. Women's issues are being brought to the forefront. Something amazing happened. Kamala Harris was voted in as the first female vice president of all time. That's absolutely amazing. And she is having difficulty as a vice president. There have been articles coming out showing that it's intense, it's difficult, things are happening at this time that are super stressful and hard to manage. And so she has been grappling with that. but we cannot ignore the amazing victory for women. Also, the Free Britney movement is something that is massive. This issue with Britney Spears and her conservatorship is taking, again, the world by storm. Everybody is talking about this, and it has us questioning the rights of women, autonomy over their bodies, over their rights and their money and their lives. This is something involving women that is certainly prevalent in the news as we speak. Another huge area of tension is the US Olympics. The first transgender woman ever was admitted to participate in the World Olympics, and this is something that has brought a lot of issues around women and women's rights up to the surface, along with track stars. Women who are cisgender, they were born women, they have naturally high levels of testosterone. They are being told they are not allowed to run unless they take supplements that will lower their naturally high testosterone. So again, this is a massive issue that is asking a lot of people to look at the rights of women and how women are being treated. I also want to say I do live in Austin, Texas. Recently, there was a lot of restrictions put on abortion and women's rights and access to abortion. The final thing that I'll mention is that, again, when Rahu was in Cancer in the nakshatra of Pushya, we saw Bill Cosby persecuted for his abuse and absolute ridiculous behavior towards women, how he mistreated them and had a lot of sexual misconduct, just unimaginable things, super, super unfortunate. Again, he was persecuted, and there was a sentencing to prison for, I think it was like up to 15 years in prison for what he did. Happened when Rahu was in Cancer in the nakshatra of Pushya. Now, when we see Ketu in Scorpio and Rahu in Taurus, recently we saw Bill Cosby released and freed, and his sentencing was overturned. Super, super weird stuff, super, super interesting. We see that these signs and these nakshatras are obvious pressure points for us to look at women and women's related issues. So something very interesting, something to follow. We will see after this transit, Rahu move into Aries and Ketu move into Libra. I think that will be a very interesting time and kick up a lot of issues, particularly when Rahu is in the nakshatra of Bharani. So I hope that this was interesting. I hope that you learned something new. If you would like to schedule a reading with me, you can email me at astrologynowpodcast@gmail.com or follow my website, which I'll make sure and list in the descriptions, along with some other resources if you're interested in learning more about Vedic astrology. Again, my name is Christine with Astrology Now podcast. I hope you all have a wonderful week and stay safe.